Welcome to another episode of Highside, Lowside. I am your host, Spurg. I am joined by Zach, and we're also joined today by Mat Oxley. Who's Mat Oxley? Well, he has been a guest on the podcast before, but you probably know him because he's a renowned MotoGP journalist and historian, and he wrote a new book on Marc Márquez. We're going to talk about Marc Márquez and the book. We're also going to talk about the history of MotoGP in recent years, and we're going to look into the future to see what can we expect from MotoGP in 2026. We're also going to talk about racing viewership being up globally as well as the United States, and should dinosaur dual sports be put out of their misery? We might even talk about babies. You never know. All that and much, much more on today's episode of the podcast. But first, a word from our sponsor. So in these Motool conversations, we talk a lot about changing your engine oil. But what about your gear oil? What if you're out there on a shaft drive motorcycle burning up the miles and you haven't checked out your gearbox lately? That final drive system, that needs some attention. Well, luckily, Motool has a full line of gear oil products to make sure that your bike is running tip-top all the time. Even if you don't have a chain, Motool's got you covered with their high-end gear oil. To learn more about how Motool can help you from grinding your gears, head over to RevZilla.com/Motool. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL. And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the Airbag Save page. RevZilla is dedicated to making sure that you are informed about all the newest safety technology coming down the pike. And the newest, most protective safety technology that we've seen in recent years is the evolution of airbag technology. So to learn about the entire line of airbag products and which one might be right for you and your ride, check out RevZilla.com/airbags. Now, on with the show.
Okie dokie, everybody. Here we go. Off on another high side, low side road trip, if you will, the next hour or so. We're going to talk to the one and only Mat Oxley, of course, about his new book about Marc Márquez. And we're going to hopefully, go off course from Marc Márquez a little bit and talk about history of MotoGP, how Marc Márquez fits into it and that kind of thing, based on all of Matt's insight and research on MM93, as he's known.
If you're listening and you're not watching, Mr. Oxley wrote a book with two titles. So the title on the front is Marc the Magnificent, 7 times MotoGP King. And then the title on the back is Marc the Merciless, Grinning Assassin. So you can choose which of the. We'll have to ask him. Why two titles?
I assume the reason is that it's just the book is that dense and big and important that it needs two titles really to encapsulate everything that's involved. Looking forward to that conversation. But before we do that, high side, low side listeners and viewers, our friend Spurg has got a little bit of not the racing news. Spurg is not a big racing guy, if we're being honest, but
I'm a casual.
You're a casual observer, but you do have something you want to talk about, and it's based on an article that our buddy Dustin Whelan wrote over Common Tread. I'll let you take it from here, Spurg.
Yeah. So Dustin wrote a article recently that kind of ties into some of what we'll get into speaking with Matt today. The article is titled "Racing Attendance and Television Viewership Surges in 2025." And really the story here is that, attendance and viewership of motorcycle racing is on the rise. And, what does that mean for motorcycling, not just globally, but also in the United States? I think one of the areas of motorcycle racing that's been really prominent in the U.S. Is Supercross. If you've never been to a Supercross race, it's a very Americanized experience, right? You go to a stadium, you have a beer, you have a hot dog, you sit down and you watch all the racing happen within, complete view of the track.
And there's pyrotechnics
there's
and
flames,
neon
there's
lights,
fire,
and it's $20
there's gasoline
for a beer.
that they pour
it's
out
great.
in the dirt and they light it on fire. It's crazy. But they were talking about how some of the global viewership of Supercross has increased by, 43%. Over 329,000 fans showed up early for pre-race activities. I think the most watched or the most attended round was in Arlington, Texas, with over 68,000 fans showing up to AT&T Stadium. So like when we're thinking about motorcycle racing, it's not necessarily as prominent in our minds as what, we'll probably get into when we talk about like the global fervor for motorcycle racing, but it's definitely, according to the numbers that Dustin shared in this article, it's definitely something where it's moving in the right direction for the American audience.
It is. And it speaks to one of the reasons we want to talk about it. Now, Spurgeon, I know I'm looking at our notes doc here, so I'm gonna tee up here. If you were a cold and merciless corporation making money in the motorcycle industry, it would make sense that you would sponsor such an event.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, speaking of cold and merciless, they, RevZilla.com pays our bills, and we are nothing if not huge fans of RevZilla.com. RevZilla is actually going to be the presenting Fox broadcast sponsor of MotoGP in the United States for the 2026 race season. We are very excited about that.
Yes.
It's something where, and we're going to get into some of this with Matt. But like when I first started attending MotoGP, I think the first race that I went to was 2011 at Indy. And, we used to have Laguna Seca, we used to have Indianapolis, we used to have, and then eventually we got Austin, and now we really just have Austin.
Yeah, just down to one round. Yeah.
But, as far as, some of the stats that Dustin put in here, MotoGP's social media presence globally is over 60 million now, which is, roughly 61% higher than it was a little over a year ago. And I think when we start talking about social media, we're looking at a younger audience. They're saying that, the majority of people watching MotoGP now are around the age of 35 years old or younger. I'd be interested to hear, Matt's opinion on some of this. And, they're looking at a 12% increase in estimated followership. The way that Dorna calculates it is roughly a 632 million global fan base. That's a lot of people watching motorcycle racing.
Yes, indeed. So if for no other reason, our buddy Dustin's story about global, domestic and global viewership of motorcycle racing being on the rise, it makes sense that we'd be talking to Mr. Mat Oxley about motorcycle racing today. So let's bring Mr. Mat Oxley in here. If you're not familiar with Matt, he was on the podcast twice before, I believe, once to talk about MotoGP writ large and once to talk about the history of the Isle of Man TT. Matt has raced at the Isle of Man TT. He's been in the MotoGP paddock for approximately 150 years. I think I don't remember what the number is exactly. But he's been around a long time, has interviewed, talked to, and probably gotten drunk with more people than you've even ever heard of in the MotoGP paddock. Mat Oxley, welcome yet again to the Highside, Lowside podcast.
Hey, Zach. Hey, Spurge. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Look forward to the chat.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
You doing well?
Of course, because
we talked before the show about how I'm doing. We don't need to bother everybody with all that. But let's just say I'm fine. I'm breathing.
Matt, in your experience, obviously we're on the cusp of the 2026 season getting kicked off here. In your experience over the past year, have you seen a rise in attendance for MotoGP specifically?
At some races, it's super busy, which is fantastic to see. You can't beat being at a track where it's packed out and the crowd's going nuts, and that's what you want. You want the atmosphere, and it also kind of makes you feel good because we all know that motorbike racing is awesome, and sometimes you go to some tracks and there's not many people there, and you're like, why don't people understand? So it is. I wouldn't say that I've noticed a general increase, but some races have been very busy, which is great. And obviously we've got Liberty bought MotoGP bought Dorna last year, and if they can do if they can get more people on board like they did with Formula One, that will be awesome. Because it's just great to like you were talking about Supercross. When you're in a stadium and the whole place is going crazy, that's kind of part of the reason to go there, is to suck up, not just to watch motorbikes go around, but also to suck up that atmosphere, to experience that atmosphere that kind of gives you a chill, doesn't it? Some races I go to, you really do get a kind of goosebumps. When there's a move or something and you hear the crowd go. Spain, obviously it happens more than anywhere because no one is more nutty about bikes in Spain.
Yeah, I want to get into Spain specifically in a second here. one of the other things, Matt, you, for the audience that might not know, you are also the co-host of the Oxley Bomb MotoGP podcast. Have you noticed, has there been more of an uptick in your audience around MotoGP and more people kind of coming in to hear what you guys have to say?
Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, we're quite geeky, right? you got to be really into it to kind of sit and listen to us for an hour. So, and we haven't tried to kind of broaden the show's appeal. We just do what we do. So I think, it's always going to be a kind of niche thing what we do, but that's fine. We're happy with that.
Well, on that topic, sorry to interrupt you, but I just would like to say this conversation today, as with many Highside, Lowside conversations, tends to be when we do go into a very specific silo, such as MotoGP, or even narrower silo, such as Marc Márquez, we're still going to be talking about fairly broad scope topics. Yeah. And your co-host on the podcast, Peter Baum, and yourself, I would just like to plug you as a self-described MotoGP geek. I think I would like to plug you guys as at the very least to follow on social media, because the stuff that you guys post about, I think, is really interesting. Your writings on motorsport are interesting, and Peter's Instagram feed to me is fascinating. He's just like always posting a picture of like some tiny little piece of aluminum on a swing arm, and saying like, well, this is what this is for, we think, but we're not sure. Honda won't say. And it's just, I think it's super fun. So if you're listening to this thinking like, oh God, I wish they would dive into more detail, then do follow Matt and Peter on social media and look for their writings and their podcasts and stuff, because it is much more specific.
So so our goal for this episode, I am coming in as the casual MotoGP fan, and I'm going to allow Zach and Matt to get into the weeds a little bit. I found the book really fascinating, Matt. I've been a fan of your writing for a long time. Starting with Stealing Speed and kind of going down the rabbit hole of some of the works you've created over the years. But I also want to say to our audience as a whole, some of the topics that I want to bring into the conversation will hopefully kind of keep this fun for all listeners, no matter your level of interest in MotoGP. And I want to pivot with that to chapter 5 of your book, Matt. So you, in my opinion, I think where I got really excited as like the beginning of the book was actually chapter 5. Up until that point, and we'll get in there, you're kind of getting into maybe some of the racing ethos and like how Marc is who he is and where he got. But then you get to chapter 5, you get into Marc's youth a little bit. But what I found fascinating was the very end of the chapter, you start talking about Spain and why the Spanish history was so important for motorcycle racing and how motorcycle racing got so ingrained in Spanish culture. And I guess that's where I would like to start the conversation today is just like, why Spain?
Spurg is the former history teacher here, and as this podcast is about Marc Márquez, and he wants to start with General Franco. So let's do that, please.
It is about that time.
It's cool.
It is about that time.
No, it is super interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
The thing is, what I'd say about history is that, we are, if you look at history as a kind of tower block, and we're on the top floor because we're now, if we're going back to the 1940s for this motorbike stuff, that's on like the 15th floor out of 50 floors. And if you took away that floor, the whole thing would fall down, right? So every bit of history that's happened is important, is part of what we are now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Good
whether
analogy.
we like it or not, everything that happens now happens because of stuff that happened before, right? So after the Second World War, it was the same in Italy as well. There was a huge trying to get people out of the villages into the towns to work in the factories. So in Italy as well, and Spain and Italy especially, building very cheap little two-stroke motorcycles that people could buy, hate to use the word, but peasants, let's just say peasants in the fields and so on, to ride into town on their little 50cc or 125cc scooter or motorbike and go and get a job in the factory and earn money and bring it back to the family. And once that started in Spain and Italy, you get a few kids or a few young men or a few young women on little motorbikes and stuff, and after a while they're going to say, let's have a race. You know what I mean? And at that point, they didn't have racetracks, so they would just organize a race around the town. The local mayor would say, yeah, we're going to have a race around the town. So 20 of you guys bring your 125s and off you go, and we'll put some straw bales in front of the post office, and and round they go and round in circles. And that was the beginning of it. And it built up from there, and the manufacturers got stronger. Spain had a lot, it was a kind of pariah of Europe because it had General Franco in charge. We'd just beaten the fascists in Europe, and there was Franco being a fascist dictator. And so we were just like, they were kind of blockaded almost, so they had to look after themselves and make their own motorbikes. So they had Bultaco, Derby, Ossa, Montesa, all these little factories churning out these cheap little two-strokes. And the riders got faster and the bikes got faster. And eventually, by the 60s, they were fast enough to go into Grand Prix. And Angel Nieto won their first world championship in 1969, I think. And it's just been like a snowball effect ever since. So they won the 50cc world championship, then they won the 125, then they won the 250, and then they won the MotoGP. And and because they're so in love with it, it's a cultural thing. They just love motorbikes. They love motorbikes. Wherever you go in Spain, Italy's the same. You go in down a little town, and there's like loads of kids riding around on little scooters and motorbikes. Right. It's just what they do. It's in their blood, and the weather obviously helps.
Right. Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but like part of it too, right, was like because of Franco's isolation policies where it's like, no, we are going to kind of keep everything in Spain. It fed into that. And so when Spanish riders started winning, it became this point of pride. We're like, think about like, it's like, I guess the way that we might look at like, if we win a gold medal in the Olympics, that's kind of what this was for Spain at the time when they could send their riders out in the world.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Angel Nieto was their kind of first major sporting star, and that again creates there's a motorbike racer and all the kids go, wow, I want to do that. You know what I mean? And because they're so into it, the manufacturers are there, little manufacturers, but they were still super keen to go racing. They were tiny little manufacturers, relatively speaking, but they were super keen to go racing. So then you've got engineers growing up, learning about all this stuff, and then somebody starts a race team and blah, blah, blah. So it's just this snowball effect. You've got riders, you've got engineers, you've got team people, you've got mechanics. And now, like I say, they work their way all through the classes. And it didn't all just happen by chance because the National Federation, which in the States is the AMA, but in Spain it's RFME, which I think means Royal Federation of Motociclismo España, we're like, right, okay, how can we maximize our power in this sport? So we'll create this little race series here, super cheap, where riders can start. So you had people like Cito Pons and Alex Crivier and all these guys that went on to win world championships, all started in these cheap little one-mate championships, which Marc Márquez did as well. You know what I mean? So there were actually people thinking, how can we make ourselves even stronger in this sport? So, and then you go into a MotoGP paddock now, probably more than half the teams are Spanish. More than half the mechanics are Spanish. More, maybe a third of the riders are Spanish. It's not just the riders that. Yeah. The depths.
Dorna is Spanish, right? Yeah. RevZilla is Spanish.
So, exactly. So Dorna, who own it now, even though Liberty have bought Dorna still run MotoGP. They're just owned by Liberty now. When Dorna bought in '92, because by that point, motorbike racing was huge in Spain. Well, not so huge everywhere else, but they're like, okay, we're going to buy this because it's going to work in Spain, and we think we can sell it to everyone else as well. So it just became more and more Spanish in a way. I mean, a lot of people say it's too Spanish now. But, any country can decide to go in there and spend loads of money and become the new Spain if they want to.
It's interesting that Spurgeon used the same word that I was going to use when I posed this question, which is isolationist. The whole idea that Spain, you said, was sort of blockaded and politically and maybe socially and perhaps economically, culturally a little bit, were separated a little bit. It's interesting to think that bred this sort of like do-it-yourself attitude, which created machines, and it created race series, and it created interest, and ultimately created talent. Because you started with Angel Nieto, and then Cito Pons, and then Alex Crivier, and then Marc Márquez, and that's obviously a extremely brief anthology of all the Spanish talent that has ever occurred in motorcycle racing. But that's a fantastic kind of, quick analysis of it. And it's not something that I had ever really considered before I read this book. And I know that, like Spurge said, he found it fascinating. I also think, Spurge, that's a good transition to the next topic here, which, unless you have another question.
Well, I was going to say before we jump on, I think just what struck me too and this kind of ties into the chapters that came before it. And the next topic that we're going to get to is the why Marc Márquez. But like, you know, with this history, like you're able to turn on a TV in Spain and watch children racing a motorcycle, right? And that's something that like, it really struck me as interesting because I would imagine you have this contingency of people that are following, you know, kids all the way through the ranks to see who gets up there. And so now you have this pressure on children that like, I can't even imagine, like we have, you know, local races in the off-road world where kids can go race, but like they're not televising the adults doing it, let alone the kids doing it. So, you know, we don't have anything like that where you can turn on the TV and watch kids, you know, racing around a go-kart track. That's got to be something that really speaks to that fervor. Yeah.
It's cultural enthusiasm. I think, you know, it's just what they love doing it. And they spend a lot of money on it as well. You know, a huge amount of the sponsors in MotoGP are Spanish as well because they love motorbikes. They love spending money on motorbikes. And just one last thing on this whole Spanish thing. It's become such a crucible, like California was in the 70s, 80s when you had Wayne Rainey, Eddie Lawson, Kenny Roberts, all these guys growing up riding dirt track around, you know, and that was the crucible at that point. This was producing the talent. And if you wanted to make it, you went to the States and learned how to dirt track. Now, I know a lot of American families that now live in Spain.
Yes,
they've taken their kids want to make it, and they're like, okay, let's have an adventure. Not just American, Australian as well. Let's have an adventure. We're going to move to Spain, and we're going to go racing. We're going to take the kid racing, and you know this is an expensive thing to do. I mean, if you want to ride in Moto3, the Junior World Championship, which is 90% in Spain, you're talking €200,000 a year. So that's basically $200,000-300,000 just for the ride, let alone moving your family and. You know what I mean? All that stuff.
Right.
So this is a big commitment. But if you don't do that, if you're not in Spain by the time you're 10, you're probably not going to make it.
But it sounds like even like with Marc Márquez's transition, it was almost like he didn't necessarily even want to go to street riding. He was having so much fun riding dirt and motocross that like it was almost something where, because it's not just, and I guess maybe this is a good point as we kind of segue into why is Marc Márquez the way he is, but it wasn't just like Spain is big in putting kids on, you know, go-kart tracks on 125 mini bikes. Like it was the culture of you could go motocrossing, you could go flat tracking. All of this kind of just started to really, you know, come up in Spain.
Yeah, I mean, he comes from a country town called Cervera, which is hour and a half ride from Barcelona into the country. And I mean, Spain is not heavily populated. So I mean, in some ways, it's probably a little bit like the States, parts of the States. And you know, and if you've got a not heavily populated area, you can have motocross, you can have enduros and stuff like that without pissing off the locals. Keep my language. So that's what he grew up doing little enduros. I think his first competitive races, he had a little Pee-wee 50, PW50 Yamaha, which you know, Casey Stoner, Colin Edwards, all these guys started on those. And I think in his first competitive event, he still had outrigger wheels on the back. You know what I mean? Because he could
kidding.
I mean, he's tiny now. You know, I mean, he was so small. But yeah, so he started doing enduros, and they started. I mean, his dad and mum. His dad is a huge bike nut and was in the local club, and they didn't race. His dad didn't race, but he was a marshal. You know, a corner worker, as you say in the States. For dirt for enduro and motocross events, and Mark and Alex, the kids, would go along and be marshals as well, you know, waving flags saying, you know, danger coming, you know, watch out, someone's crashed. So it's quite an unusual way for a little kid to start. And then he would like, hang on, I want, you know, Mark was like, who's 3 years older than Alex, was like, hang on, I want to go at this. I don't want to stand here with a flag. I want to do it, you know. And that's how it started. And just quite organically, I think his dad, generally, the kids that make it, their parents don't push them, right? You know, they're letting the kids lead the way, and the kid says, "I want to do this, I want to do that." I mean, I know when his dad got him a ride in this little mini bike, you know, asphalt mini bike series, Mark was like, "No, I want to do motocross. I don't like asphalt. I want to do motocross." But then I think he did it a few times. Like, yeah, I do like this, you know. And there you go. I mean, he was probably, I can't remember how old was he then. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a question about that, which I guess is sort of a step back in some ways, but just sort of like broadens the scope of this. Spurge, I think you wrote down this question of is Marc Márquez someone you've always wanted to write about? And that to me is part of my question, is sort of, you just mentioned that he started with, he started as a track marshal on enduro events. What are some other things that come to mind for you that make him an atypical MotoGP world champion, or, a little bit, because, a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of like, he's been part of this like river of talent coming out of Spain. And he's just part of this mass population of kids, people that are interested in it and get into it. And then some of them get to be incredibly good at it. And he's one of those people. And so in some ways it's generic, but what you just mentioned, I think was interesting. Is like, it's different than what you normally see. And I'm curious what other things pop to mind as far as like his family, his experience, his, I don't know, socioeconomic status, any of that stuff that's different. Very
normal working class family. His dad was a digger driver, on construction sites, a talented digger driver. So obviously the hand-eye coordination he had, he would be called in for the tricky jobs and stuff. And his mum was an office worker. So, very normal little family, not a lot of money. They probably wouldn't have got very far, except, well, they couldn't afford to go road racing. It was only because they got into this cheap series and somebody said, well, look, we'll help you, that they managed to make it. But I mean, what makes Marc atypical? I mean, literally just this kind of supernatural feel for the bike that he has that allows him to kind of basically crash half the time and not crash. Not many, in fact, no one can do that. His other thing is the way he crashes to find performance and just doesn't care. I mean, he came into the Premier Class MotoGP in 2013. That's 13 seasons ago. And the way he can slide the front tire all the time, every corner, and usually get away with it, no one else can do that. It's 13 years after he did that, brought it in. And also the way he crashes to find performance in practice, no one does that, So, I mean, that is like, well, when Kenny Roberts turned up in Grand MotoGP in 78 and was sliding the rear, within 5-6 years, everybody was doing that, right? Márquez has been there for 13 years and still no one can do what he could do 13 years ago. So he is pretty special, I mean, really,
generational talent,
one in a billion or whatever,
Well, I feel like the first few chapters of your book, are kind of dissecting some of that, right? Is it the brains? Is it the fearlessness? Is it his just raw talent? And you did an amazing job of kind of getting in and interviewing a wide variety of people, from, other people he raced with to racers that were generations before him that just observed him, to his ownership groups and mechanics and all these things. And one of the quotes that stood out for me was a quote from Stoner. And it's not you were talking about fearlessness. Is it that Marc is just fearless?
Yeah.
And the quote is, it's not a lack of fear, it's knowing what you did wrong. Yeah. And that was a quote that really stood out to me, because it speaks to the learning aspect. And you're talking about the crashing, and it's not that he's fearless. It's like, oh, cool, I did that to figure out what was wrong, and now I'm going to learn from it and take it back and tweak the way that I'm doing things.
Yeah. I mean, Marc is very well known for crashing an awful lot. I think since he's been in MotoGP 13 years ago, at race meetings, he's crashed like 260 times, right? That's a lot of crashes, right? But he's also won 7 MotoGP titles. So what does that tell you? It tells you that he's not crashing in races, right? He's crashing in practice. And exactly as you say, he's crashing because he's like, I wonder what happens if I do this at this corner. Oh, I've gone too far. Goes back to the garage, speaks to his engineers, and it says either, well, I know where the limit is, I can't do that, or comes back and says, maybe we can do this to the bike, and maybe I'll be able to do that without crashing. You know what I mean? So, I mean, to think about that, to put yourself in that same situation and just go, well, I'm just going to go out there, and if I crash, I crash, and, I'll learn something from that. I mean, that's pretty special.
I forget who you said it was that was following him, and I think it was in Qatar. Yeah, and he was locking up the front, like not
locking it. He wasn't locking it. He was so this is in Qatar, under the in the Middle East, under the spotlights in Lowside Grand Prix MotoGP track, and they race at night, so the track's quite cold, and under the floodlights, and he was going out in testing. I think it was testing, not practice. And Jack Miller, sort of famous, won a few MotoGP races himself, was following him, and he was like, "Oh my God!" He was going into a particular corner and just putting the handlebars on nearly full lock, leaning over into the corner and just going, literally just turning the handlebars to try and make the bike crash.
And just like sliding the front,
sliding that and going, oh, okay, I can understand what's going on now. And Miller came back into the garage and then went to see Marc afterwards. He said, what the hell were you doing then? He said, I just wanted to see what was going on with it. And Miller was just like, my God, how can you deal with somebody who can just do that? No one else does that. Never,
Yeah.
People mess around with the rear tire sliding.
Right.
Because it's easier to slide the rear tire because the rear tire is following you. The front tire is leading you. So it's quite easy to slide the rear tire. Slide the front tire without crashing is very, very difficult and very, very scary as well.
I wonder if you can speak to this a little bit. I've talked to Marc Márquez a lot in your life, in your career. I've talked to him once or twice maybe. And one thing I noticed was that it feels like he's, and maybe this is to do with family values or just the type of person he is, but he's very affable. He's very likable on camera. When you speak to him in person, he's also very, he's humble. He doesn't, in my impression. So I'm curious what you think about this, but it feels to me like that is the type of personality that you kind of need to have in order to learn from a crash, and not the type of personality that you might expect someone at the top level of a sport, whether it's Formula One or motorcycle or MotoGP or whatever, to have, which would be, I'm amazing at this. And when they crash, they think, well, whatever, that must have been a problem with the bike or the tires or the track or something like that. I'm just going to send it again next time. But instead, he's humble enough to realize that while he is, beating up on everyone in the world on a motorcycle and really no one's better than he is, he's still striving to be better, which I think is a curious trait, not completely unique to him, but an interesting trait to have.
I think you're exactly right, because obviously he has a huge ego. Or, if you're going to get to the top of motorbike racing, you need to have a huge ego. But you can also be humble at the same time. You know what I mean? It's basically controlling your personality, using your ego to make you hungry and willing to take the risks. Also using your humility to work with your engineers and stuff. If you come back into like you just said, if you come back into the garage saying I crashed and it was so-and-so's fault, it was the tire's fault.
Right.
Marc is never like that. And one of the engineers that I interviewed for the book, Harold Bartel, Austrian guy, he's been around in the sport since the 1970s. So he's worked with everyone. Wow. And he worked with Marc when he was in 125s, he was a kid. And he just said he's never known a more honest motorcycle racer than Marc Márquez. He will tell you exactly what happened. He will never try and say, excuse himself, and blame it on something else. He will just say, well, I messed up there. I did this, and that's kind of hugely important, because if you're honest all the time with your engineers, then they know what's going to go. They know what's going on, and it's that kind of world is all built on trust. Your engineer needs to trust the rider, and the rider needs to trust the engineer. And if you get that whole thing going, it's a virtuous circle where, rather than people doubting each other and like, did he really mean that? Is he trying to, you know what I mean? So it's such a, when I started the book, I kind of, the mate, Spurg, you were going on about the sort of first few chapters. And so, you always think about talent. That's what you think. And this amazing talent for all the crazy stuff he can do. But then I started interviewing all these people and realizing, I've known him for years, that it's also his mentality, which we're just talking about, which is massively important. The way he is, the way he considers everything, and he's always thinking ahead. If you interview him, he's three questions ahead of you. You know what I mean? If you're speaking to him, he's so, he's speaking in his second or third language, and he's way ahead of me. You know what I mean? He you know what I mean? Whenever it's a bit like speaking to Valentino Rossi. All the hundreds of racers I've interviewed, those two stand out for that. Just the intellect, the sharpness of their intellect is just mind-boggling.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that makes sense, and it's. I think it's in some ways easy to be a fan of Marc Márquez because, like I said, he's sort of affable and likable when he's on camera. Yeah, it's sort of like, it makes me happy to hear you talk about him that way too, as having a lot of intelligence and a lot of emotional intelligence and a lot of like understanding of himself and his own limits and that kind of thing. It's sort of like, I'm not saying I'm number one Marc Márquez fan in the world, but it's the kind of trait that you like to see in a champion, I think,
I think a lot of people think it's made up. It's a front. And of course, anyone in the public eye, they're not going to be 100% themselves.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Spurge knows about that.
Life is a lot easier if you are mostly yourself in public.
Yeah.
If you're trying to be two different people, your life gets quite complicated. And interviewing all the people that have worked with him, from lowly mechanics to engineers to team bosses to medical people, they all adore him. And to me, that's the important thing,
Right.
And you go into when he was at Honda, you go into, and it's the same now, you go into the hospitality and he's having lunch and he's got everyone in his crew, not his hangers-on or anything, his mechanics, his engineers, his data guys, and they're all laughing and joking and having, they adore him, and to me, that's the real Marc Márquez, that's him away from the public eye, hanging out with the people he works with,
Well, I know I was trying to find the exact quote, but one of the things that I found interesting was, his rookie season in MotoGP was 2013, correct?
Yeah.
And so his teammate at that time, Danny Pedrosa, would have been already racing for Honda for a few years. And one of the things you talked about was when they brought
8
Marc,
years already.
Yeah. So like when they brought Marc up to Honda, they kept saying like, well, look at how Danny's doing it. And like Danny's riding, the harder tires. So you need to be riding the harder tires. And, Marc was like, okay, but could I just try the softer tires, and like, and then he ended up, winning and, trying new things, but it was like kind of the respect and the back and forth that he had with the people in his wheelhouse. And then you go on to write about like, oh, well then, kind of later in the season, it wasn't just like, what is Danny doing? But like, wait, what's Marc doing? And it was kind of like that reverse, in the garage of like, how are they figuring this stuff out?
And also going back to, obviously he is humble, but he's also got an ego. So at the beginning of his rookie season, when, as you say, the chief engineer was saying, you need to reuse this tire. And he was like, oh, actually, now I think I'm going to use that tire. And then he was crashing a lot at preseason testing, and his chief engineer was saying, man, you got to calm down. You got to do and then he was leading the world championship after 3-4. So every time he won a race, he'd go over to the chief engineer and go, still me. I'm still the same guy I was back in February, but I'm leading the world championship, mate, And, if you want to win the world championship, I'm your man, So he really, he knows how to get people on his side, but in all kinds of ways, by building a good sort of family atmosphere around him. But when he needs something to be done, he doesn't shy away. He's like, I need this. Give me this now.
I'm reminded of a couple things. One is an anecdote that I remember from Kenny Roberts from way back when. I think my dad told me reading about in the 70s or something like that. I don't think Kenny Roberts listens to this podcast, so I don't think it matters that much. I also don't think, which is to say that I don't think Kenny is as famous for being quite as humble or affable as Marc Márquez, if we're being honest, in my experience. But still a great champion. And when you talk about the ego thing, my dad told me the story about Kenny Roberts testing with Yamaha, I think, or something. And he said, the shock's no good. The shock on the bike is no good. And the engineers were like, no, it's fine. The shock is fine. The shock is fine. And he came into the paddock and took the shock off himself and opened it, and a bunch of foam came out. And he like pointed to the engineers and he said, this is what I'm feeling. Fix this. This is the problem. The shock is not working right. And, of course, there's like Japanese engineers and all these technicians and stuff that are, and they're sort of taken aback, like, holy crap, this guy's not joking around. And I feel like that's the kind of like, ego that a lot of these guys have. And I'm also reminded of, I actually don't remember which of the many, documentaries or whatever that have been done about Marc Márquez, but I think it was one of the ones on the MotoGP site where they were interviewing him, talking about how he made this transition to Ducati after the horrendous upper arm injury that he had in 2020, I guess it was.
Yeah.
And there's a clip. It still gives me chills. My buddy sent it to me. Our buddy Andrew sent me this clip, and I still get chills when I think about it. But it's Marc Márquez talking about signing with Ducati, and he said he took his shirt off and showed them the scar in his arm and said, I didn't do this for fun. I did this to win. And if you don't want me, I'll win with someone else. And I was like, I mean, I get chills just saying it out loud. You're like, holy crap. And I love that he has that duality in his personality.
Shortly before he left Honda, in fact. But I mean, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because he was basically trying to put a rocket out under Honda, who had been basically sleeping for several years.
Gotcha,
Ducati went crazy with all this downforce aero and ride height devices, and Honda were just like trying to catch up. And Marc was basically, I didn't do this to, so you either get up to speed or I'm out of here. And
exactly. Like I have high standards for myself and I have high standards for other people around me. And so if you're not going to follow me,
then, it's like any trying to endeavor. You've got to be friendly with your people around you, ideally, but also if you really need something, you've just got to say, right, sort this out now.
Right.
You can't be lovely and nice all the time.
Well, I would say he made a good point in the book, Matt, around like Honda, you have all the time in the world. I don't.
Exactly.
I'm finite in my ability to go out and race motorcycles.
That's a great way to put it.
But you can keep developing the bike. But
right.
Sure.
Well,
exactly.
on the topic of you can't be nice all the time, I think that's a good transition to the next thing we want to talk about, which is the sort of like sharper, slightly more caustic side of Marc Márquez, as affable and humble and as sweet a guy as he seems to be, or is most of the time. He really ruffled a lot of feathers when he first came to MotoGP. And I have my own memory of this, but Spurge, I want you to take the kickoff to this section because I think you had a good kind of like broad question here.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I was left with at the end of chapter 4, because you kind of build to this, right? And it's the aggression. And I think it's like a theme throughout the book about
on the track specifically.
When racing aggression, like how aggressive is too aggressive. And I think you're talking about them, battling like gladiators. There's so many of the descriptions of war. The sport is war minus the shooting is actually the title of chapter 4. Can you really be too aggressive on the racetrack? I mean, like, that's a question I want to throw out to you, Matt. In all of this back and forth, is there such thing? These guys are getting paid to win. They're getting like their careers depend on winning. And yet it's always like, oh, well, you rode too hard. You penalized me, blah, 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 blah.
Right. Not gentlemanly, blah, blah, blah.
Can you be too aggressive or not? What's your take on this, Matt?
I think you can be too aggressive. And Marc has knocked off a lot of people, but he's also been knocked off by other people. I mean, there's not a rider out there that hasn't knocked a few people off. Marc probably more than most, but not dramatically more than most. Certainly not, not dramatically more than other bad behaved people. So he is very aggressive. Is he too aggressive? Some people say yes, some people say no. I mean, I kind of you've got to look at it and understand why riders are aggressive. And one of the reasons why riders are in general so much more aggressive than they used to be 20, 25 years ago is because all the rules have been written to make all the bikes exactly the same. Basically, not only have they got the same tires, they've got the same electronics. The technical rules have been written to make them all basically the same. And if the tires are all the same, all the bikes have to be designed around the tires. Therefore, it becomes very, very difficult to make the difference. In the old days when you had one guy on Bridgestone and one guy on Michelin or one guy on the Michelins would be better in some part of the track and he could overtake the guy on Bridgestone. No problem at all. Now, the quality of riding is small. Exactly. The quality of riding is so high and the technical margins are so tiny that to actually make the pass is really, really difficult. And you've got to you've got to force your way through, And when he was in 125s, he was when he was tiny. I mean, he was so tiny when he was on when he first came to 125s, they had to put special handlebars, they had to put he couldn't reach the handlebars. They had cut about 7 inches out the back of the fuel tank to move him forward, so that he could reach the handlebars, and special foot pegs so that he could reach the foot pegs. He could only barely get 1 foot on the ground.
You were saying they were putting like sandbags in his, he didn't weigh enough, so they had to like weigh him down with sand?
Yeah, they had something like 45 kilos, which is 80 pounds, 70 pounds of ballast to bring him up to, and including 8 pounds of sand in the back of his leathers to get him up to weight. So he was tiny.
Yeah,
and
four kilos of sand in his leathers. Yeah, which is which is like you said, 8 or 10 pounds. Which is crazy.
And so he was getting bullied a lot on the track then because he was so tiny. When he was 17, 18, that all the other riders were like, they knew he was fast, and they were. A lot of racing is about intimidating your rivals, bullying your rivals. It's just it's a nasty, vicious sport. It really is. It's not blokes riding around having a fun on motorbikes. It's nasty and mean, and you need to establish your reputation by showing somebody that if they stick their front wheel under you, you're not going to back off. You're quite happy to ride into them. You know what I mean? You've got to make people scared of you, right? So people were trying to do that to him, and then when he got into Moto2, he was bigger and was like, okay, I'm ready to give some back, Right. And he did, in Moto2 especially, he was doing some crazy stuff. But at the same time, what he was doing was just sublime. And he would do something. The worst thing he ever did was when he had a big accident at Phillip Island in 2011, 2012. He was continued at full race speed after the checkered flag on a practice session and hit somebody, big crash. Luckily, nobody badly injured. But in general, when he would do something bad, get sent to the back of the grid and win the race anyway.
Right.
He did that kind of thing so many times. And if people like YouTube, there's a really, really I still watch it probably once a month because it's so good. But 2012 Moto2 race at Motegi in Japan.
Yeah,
he was on the front row. No, dry. He was
dry.
He was in the dry. Start of the race, he's on, I think, Paul Espargaro, who's fighting for the championship. Really crucial race. He's on pole position and he's second or third. They're all on the front row, and the lights go out. Everyone goes away, and he just goes nowhere. Somehow he thought he'd engaged first gear, but he hasn't. And it's you can die that way if you're stuck on the grid in the front row and somebody on the back row rides into the back of you. You're in big trouble. But he bangs it into first gear, and off he goes, and he's like third from last going into the first corner. Like he's like 29th or something. By the end, I think he passed 18 guys on the first lap or something. And the onboard of that is just mind-boggling. I think in the first double right, he passes 6-7 riders, some on the outside, some on the inside, big slide coming, spins up the rear tire on the exit, and then gets pinged out the seat and is still full on the gas and passes people on the straight. It's just, I'd really advise everyone to watch it. It's just spellbinding. Spellbinding. So even when he was doing bad stuff, the good stuff was just so beautiful.
Too magical to ignore, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when he came to MotoGP, he was a bit crazy and doing some crazy stuff. But generally he was crashing on his own, not with other people. And think about, since he's come to Ducati, he's hardly done any of that. Okay, so he's older. Also, he's got a bike that's the best bike on the grid. Generally, when he was on the Honda, it wasn't the best bike on the grid.
Right.
1 year, 2014, it was the best bike on the grid.
Yeah.
Those other 8 or 9 years he was on the Honda, he was having to fight like a maniac to win on that bike.
I remember when he came to the longest interview I ever did with him was actually, which I think we've talked about on the podcast before, Spurge, but I interviewed him in February or March of 2013.
Was this
before he had ever ridden
underwear color?
Yeah, exactly. Where he's talking about his underwear. I love that story. He had not raced in a MotoGP race yet, but he was on the factory Honda team, and they were doing testing at Circuit of the Americas for the first time that they went there. And I remember talking to another MotoGP rider, and he said, "Oh, there are a lot of guys in MotoGP that are worried about Marc. Like they're scared of him, because they know that he's so talented and he's so good." And I remember thinking, with all his shenanigans in Moto2, where he did, he clattered into people sometimes and he intimidated people. And I remember thinking, there's no way that you're going to come to MotoGP and intimidate, Jorge Lorenzo or Valentino Rossi or I don't know, Cal Crutchlow, or just people that just feel like they're kind of hard as nails in different ways. Like Jorge Lorenzo just seems like he has an impenetrable ego to me, and Cal Crutchlow just seems like you could probably drop him off a cliff and he'd be fine. He's just like so tough. And and Valentino is his own sort of like pantheon of incredible talent. And I just thought like they're not going to take that. You might be able to do that in Moto2, but you're not going to push these guys around. And yet he did. He got under their skin. He pushed them around. He clattered into people and occasionally, and they didn't have an answer for him. And I guess I'll finish this by saying one thing I've really liked about Marc Márquez, I haven't always agreed with his decisions on a racetrack. I've sometimes been disappointed in his actions or his demeanor. I don't think I've ever heard him complain about being hit. I don't think I've ever heard him say in any series, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I don't think I've ever heard him say, "Oh, like that guy needs to calm down," or like, "Oh, like that was out of line," or anything like that. He's never says that.
Matt,
people run into him, and he just says that's what happens.
Matt, you had a quote in the book too, where like he was going to complain at one point. There was like a crash where somebody hit him, and then his engineer or his somebody in the pack was like, "Don't complain because you could actually make this mistake tomorrow."
Yeah, he got taken out. I think his first season in Moto2, so that was 2011, and he got taken out really badly somewhere, and he came back into the garage, and he was pretty pissed off, and his engineer said, "Don't tell anyone, don't complain." And he said, "Why? He took me out. It was crazy, And he said, "Well, next time it might be the other way around. You might be taking another guy out." And he was like, "Okay." And sure enough, literally the next weekend, he took out some guy, and he, all racers are right all the time. That's what racers are like. Even when they're wrong, they're right. And most racers, you're right, that when they get taken out, they complain, and when they take someone out, they go like, "Well, it's no problem. What's the guy moaning about?" But Marc has because he understands, his situation would be completely untenable if he was thinking about other. So again, that does make an. And he says when did he last get to? Well, he last got taken out at Mandalika in October.
Yeah, exactly.
Broke his shoulder by Marco Bezzecchi, and he just said, "Look, this is what happens. We touch. This is what racing's about. I like it like this, and don't give Bezzecchi a hard time because no one does it on purpose,
Yeah, well, I think while we're talking about this topic, back to your point, Zach, about complaining versus complaining when it happens to you, but not when you do it to somebody else. Can you be too aggressive on a racetrack? I think we would be remiss not to bring up Rossi at this point in the conversation.
Right.
I'm gonna edit this quote, Matt, because it's a PG-13 podcast. We have kids listening. But one of the quotes that you include in the book was when, and I believe it was before Marquez came up, and Rossi's complaining about the younger generation of riders, and he calls them, a bunch of we'll say wussies and children because they're just too afraid to get out there and be aggressive. And then you fast forward to 2015 and Rossi's not too happy with the way Marquez is racing, and it leads into a lot of drama, I think, for Marquez in the 2016 season.
Yeah, I mean, like I just said, riders, they're right all the time. So 1 minute they're saying, "Oh, these guys are wussies for not being aggressive enough," and then somebody's being really aggressive to them. They're like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" You know what I mean? So this is just what riders are like. They're most racers, in fact, all hypocrites, are all hypocrites basically. They are. They're hard people. They're always right. I mean, you need to have that kind of maniacal self-belief to do what they do. And just about being too aggressive, I would say there's a very big difference between riding into the side of somebody in, like, say, 100-mile-an-hour corner and riding into the side of somebody at a 20, 30-mile-an-hour corner. There's a big difference, huge difference. When people ride into each other at 20, 30-mile-an-hour corners, somebody falls off, it's not correct, but it's no big deal. If somebody rides into into the side of somebody at 100 miles an hour, that's a completely different story, because that's when people get really badly hurt. So I think that's also where the level is with the aggression. That's also the potential danger of a collision. It has to be considered. Is it dangerous, or is it just
I'd be
poor
interested.
behavior.
I'd be interested in both of your opinions. I started watching MotoGP in the early 2000s, so around the Rossi era. Was kind of like where my friends and I started tuning in. For the two of you, which obviously you're a lot closer to this and follow it probably more religiously than I sure do. Between Rossi, who is by some one of the biggest attractors in recent years for MotoGP, and then obviously Marc Márquez kind of taking over that torch. Of the two, what similarities or differences did you see in their level of aggression? Was Márquez really more aggressive than Rossi, or was that something that Rossi was upset about because he was losing?
The thing is that Rossi was the kind of first. I mean, I call them sort of gasoline gangsters or gasoline gladiators, gasoline gangsters. Rossi. Riders have been riding into each other forever.
Ever since there were two motorcycles. Yeah. They built the first motorcycle and then they built the second one and someone crashed into the first one. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, let's go back to 2005, Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez, Rossi fighting with Sete Gibernau, and the last corner, Gibernau's in the lead going into the last corner. It's a tight, slow hairpin. Rossi dives up the inside and just goes slam into the side of Gibernau. Gibernau doesn't crash, but he gets sort of punted off the track, goes into the gravel and finishes second. And when Marquez came to MotoGP in 2013, he did exactly the same to Lorenzo at that same corner. In his first MotoGP race at Spain, he went up the inside of Lorenzo, bashed into him, put him off the track, and finished second instead of third. So Marquez was basically doing what Rossi had started in a way. And like I say, as racing has got more and more close, and when Rossi was in his pomp, that was mainly before we had spec tyres and all the bikes were very similar. They tended to be more different, so it was easier to overtake, blah, blah, blah. But Rossi, without doubt, was and glorified in his aggression. Like I remember when he was walking up to the podium after that collision with Gibernau at Jerez in 25, Gibernau was walking up this ladder, up the stairs, holding his left arm, which Rossi had ridden into, and kind of in pain. And maybe he was hamming it up a little bit, for the cameras, but I'm sure he was probably in a bit of pain. And Rossi was looking up the stairs and laughing at him, basically saying, you know what I mean? So just coming back to the whole that they're all vicious maniacs, So I would say Marquez has been more aggressive and vicious than Rossi, but, not by a factor of whatever, and he was, he followed so many, because he worshipped Rossi. There's no doubt, I've watched videos of Marc when he was doing Moto2 and Spanish TV was going around to his house in Severo, where literally he's living with his mum and dad and he's got a little bedroom and, there's a shelf there and he's got a picture of him on his PW50 and then there's 4 Rossi replicas, the mini replica motorbikes, his 500 Honda, his Yamaha M1, and then there's a VR, a 46 cap and everything. So he worshipped him. And therefore what he saw Rossi do, he you want to emulate your heroes, don't you? So a lot of what he did was emulating Rossi, So I'm not forgiving everything Marc has done, but I think he's portrayed as he's done bad things, but I think often by many people he's portrayed as worse than he really is.
I think that because you asked me the question too, Spurge, and I can't really elaborate on what Matt said much more than he has an encyclopedic memory of all this stuff and is closer to all of it than I am. I think for me, the context I'll give is that what I remember, my viewpoint is that they are more similar than they are different. And that was 100%. The biggest thing that they couldn't do. That's why they didn't go. That's why they couldn't get along on a racetrack or even off a racetrack sometimes, because they're just too similar. They both have that really like easy, likable personality. They both have that kind of like mystique of being able to do tremendous things on a motorcycle on a racetrack. And then when you interview them, they don't really tell you how they do it. There's this mystique. There's this kind of like this fog of brilliance around it all where you're kind of like, I don't even really know if I understand exactly what's going on or if they understand what they're doing, or, they're both clearly intelligent and you can kind of tell that they're toying with you when they answer questions. I don't know. It just feels like they're more similar than they are different, and that's one of the reasons that they couldn't get along. Which is a shame for me because I've always been a huge Valentino fan, and I like Marc in many ways, and it was always a shame that they couldn't get along. But like Matt said, the egos are big, and that's what happens.
Yeah, many people, riders, team bosses, and so on, they all say the same thing. The reason they clash is because they basically had a head-on collision because they're the same. They're probably doing the same thing, the one thing that Rossi's got that Marc never had, he had this kind of massive rock star persona. He was bigger than MotoGP at his pomp, at the height of his fame. He was bigger than motorbike racing. More people knew about Valentino Rossi than knew about MotoGP. And that will probably never happen again. He was like Muhammad Ali in boxing, basically.
People were still just wearing Valentino Rossi T-shirts and bringing Valentino Rossi flags after he retired because they couldn't give up. Yeah,
they still are. You go to a racetrack and there's loads of people wearing 46 hats and banners and T-shirts and Rossi was we all adored him, and still do, because he brought a lot of joy to a lot of people, because he just had that persona that was magical.
I think that's a great place to pause for a quick break. I feel bad because I know that I said I was going to keep us out of the weeds. And if you're listening and you're a casual fan that maybe started watching MotoGP last season, you might not, when I threw out Rossi, I didn't say Valentino Rossi. The two of you both kind of corrected me by throwing out a first name. And if you want to learn more about some of this, you can always read about this in the book. But
are you suggesting that Valentino Rossi is not bigger than Highside, Lowside?
Yeah, I'm just saying, maybe there's some people listening that might not know who he is. So I apologize for not starting off with Valentino Rossi and, but it is a Marc Márquez episode. So
you're forgiven, Spurg.
Yeah. Let's take a word from our sponsor, Motul, and then I want to jump back in. Matt, you kind of we started talking about body type a little bit and the size of Marc, and I want to bring us back in after this quick break with a deeper dive there.
All right, everybody. We are back with Mr. Mat Oxley for the second half of our discussion here. We'll be talking about body types, rule changes in MotoGP, and retirement. So first, I would like to touch on this idea of Marc's size. We talked about this a little bit before, right, man? We talked about how small he was, how they had to change the bike, and
putting sand down his britches,
putting sand in his pants. There's one of the I have the book here because I'm a good podcast host. There's one of the pictures. There's not a lot of pictures in the book, which I think is fine because the true joy of it is in the words. But you mentioned in one of the photo captions of him riding a little Honda RS125 GP bike in some other series. He's let's see, he was 12-year-old. Yeah, he was 12 years old, and you said he was the size of a 9-year-old. And you mentioned also that he is small to this day. He's not a big guy. When in the flesh. And I'm actually curious your take on something that I remember learning about probably 25 years ago or something like that, when Valentino Rossi, who we were just talking about, also 9-time world champion, right? Also 7-time MotoGP champion. Before he came to the Premier class in MotoGP, and I think it was Mick Doohan, who famous 5-peat Australian MotoGP champion, said, "Oh yeah, Valentino is going to be good on the bike because he's tall. He's big enough to handle a 500cc MotoGP bike." Now MotoGP bikes are, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, heavier, more powerful, exert more forces on the human body than they ever have before. And yet there are a lot of small MotoGP riders. And I'm curious, why is that? Like, how has that transition happened? Or, was Mick Doohan just drunk when he said that, or what?
If you can, I mean, there's a good median, right? There's advantages to being a bit bigger. There's advantages to being a bit smaller, and there's also advantages to being in the middle. You know what I mean? They're all kind of, you can do different things with it. Yeah, it all evens out. Rossi's quite tall,
right?
Yeah, and when you're tall, you can move around the motorcycle more, because when you're racing, you're basically trying to balance. You're moving the mass of the motorcycle. You're moving forward when it's wheeling out of a corner to stop it wheeling. you're leaning off to make it turn better in the corners, etc., etc. So yeah, so that's good to be tall, but also then you can't get so tucked in on the straight. You're probably a bit heavier. So it's swings and roundabouts, as we say in England. Most motorbike races are pretty small. If for people who have not been to a paddock or whatever, you just see these guys on TV. You can't really tell. You're with them in the paddock, they're tiny. I mean, Kenny Roberts, he's tiny. He's probably about the same size as Marc. And most horse racing jockeys are tiny. Relatively not tiny, but they're not tall.
Right.
Marc is he's not big, but man, he is muscly.
Right.
He spends a lot of time, and most racers are quite careful on this because you don't want to add more weight because more weight makes the motorbike slower and it makes it use the tires more, etc., etc. So, but he is muscly. I mean, I remember seeing a picture of him when Rossi and Márquez used to get on together. Yeah, it actually was the beginning of 2015 and testing in Malaysia, and they stood by the swimming pool at the hotel near the racetrack, and they kind of arm in arm, and Rossi's this kind of quite lanky,
right?
Not a lot of muscle there really, and then Marc is this just the muscle definition, is just wow, and he works like crazy at that because that kind of thing, because the way he rides, the aggressive way he rides on the motorcycle, and saving slides with his elbows and stuff. He understands that to be able to do that, he needs to be very strong. And I mean, he does specific exercises. He won't tell us what they are, but when he's going through a corner, he loses the front, he digs his elbow into the asphalt, and basically uses that to push himself back upright and save the crash. Now that is a pretty weird. Your body is not designed to do that kind of thing.
To carry your whole body weight and the weight of a motorcycle on your elbow.
On your elbow. So he does specific exercises to help him do that. So there's a huge amount of work, with his physios and so on, understanding which muscle groups he needs to work on and so on. So massively strong upper body, because that's where you're doing most of the work with a motorbike. And he works a lot of that. Yeah. I mean, really, these guys are, they're not only in pain when they're on the racing around and crashing, they're in pain on the gym, 5-6 times a day, just doing crazy stuff,
Yeah, that makes sense.
One of the things, I think as we're thinking about this, you're talking about, Marc using his body, and he has a long history of, I don't want to say abusing his body, but his body has taken a beating over the years. Oh, yeah. I guess for the listener that might not be as familiar, like, what would you say were some of the more impactful mishaps that he had, like of his injuries? Which ones were the ones that really had an influence on his career in maybe a negative way, and how it affected him?
He was quite lucky because he never had a proper serious injury until he broke his right upper arm in 2020. But before then, because he was crashing so much, it was more incremental. And especially because he was using his elbow and stuff. So you can imagine that every time he crashes, it's going to hurt. It's going to damage the shoulder. At the end of 2018, he had to have his left shoulder completely rebuilt. At the end of 2019, he had to have his right shoulder completely rebuilt. Right? That's a big thing, having your shoulder rebuilt.
And you think that was just multiple small injuries again and again and again and again. Eventually, it was just
just ridiculously frequent dislocating his elbow, his shoulders. He got to the point where his shoulder would dislocate, while he was training, while he was in the gym, and it'd just pop out and he'd just pop it back in. And I mean, I've literally seen him crash in practice at Valencia in Spain a few years ago, and the thing's popped out. His mechanic comes and picks him on the scooter, rides back to the truck. 2 minutes later, they pop it back in, and 5 minutes after that, he's back out on his spare bike and goes faster than he did on his first one. You just can't compute it. You're just like, what the hell? How do you do that? And so they were two huge operations. And then he broke his right upper arm, which is a very serious arm to break as a motorbike racer. A lot of careers have been ended by breaking your humerus, left or right. So he had it pinned 3 days later, pinned and plated, titanium plates and all that and pins, tried to race the next weekend. That damaged the plate more and damaged the arm more. He had to have the plate taken out, put back in, and then that got infected. So this was sort of July 2020. He crashed, broke the arm, had it pinned and plated immediately, had it repinned and replated again a month later, something like that. And then it got infected. So that winter, he had to have another operation. So they took the plates out and went back into the arm and took a bone graft from his pelvis to put into his right upper arm. And he came back to race in 2021.
And
but
that was
right.
sorry to interrupt you, Matt, but that was I believe that was the operation that happened in the United States, I think, in Minnesota, maybe?
No, we're not got to that.
Oh, we haven't
yet.
got there. Sorry. I
misunderstood. Cool.
I should have known better. Keep going.
So he had 3, and he came back in 21. He won a couple of races, but you could see that his right arm wasn't, the way he was sat on the bike, his right arm wasn't right, wasn't correct. And so finally in 2022, he underwent another operation in the States, in the Mayo Clinic I can't remember where, but in the Mayo Clinic, with a sort of shoulder, the best shoulder surgeon in the world, or best upper arm surgeon in the world. So they basically sawed his right upper arm completely in half and rotated the bottom part 34 degrees. That's quite a lot. 34 degrees. Rotated that and then pinned and plated it back together. And he was back racing again later that year. And then obviously 23, he had a horrible season, crashed 29 times. His last season with Honda, then went to Ducati and made the comeback. But I mean, so he had multiple minor injuries leading to those 2 shoulder reconstructions. And then the big one was obviously this 4 operations, including this massive humerusectomy or something it's called, where they basically saw the bone completely in half. I mean,
and then had it rotated because it was facing the wrong direction is the point. Right, I believe, Matt, is that correct? It was the way it had healed before. It was basically pointed the wrong direction, so that's why they cut it and then they rotated it so that he could.
It was so mangled after multiple operations and coming back before he should have done that. It was just and I mean, he came very close to retiring. Who wouldn't? He already had more money than he can ever spend. He's already won 8 world titles. But he's just. He's an addict. All these guys are addicts. They're addicts for the adrenaline, and they're addicts for the winning as well. And he couldn't live without that. I mean, I think in the book I quote a few people riders who crashed and got badly injured and came back against all the odds simply because they got so depressed. They had massive. They could not cope with not racing anymore. It was so central to their life that the addiction, without that buzz, they didn't want to live almost. So they would come back even when they shouldn't, and I think Márquez is kind of similar,
So I think what we probably should have done maybe at the beginning of this episode, and shame on us, was for people that might not be as familiar, give a little bit of a, why you wrote this book, why Marc Márquez is so important. I mean, Zach, you made it a casual mention, 7-time MotoGP champion, but, came in his rookie year, won in 2013, won in 2014, didn't win in 2015, won in 16, 17, 18, 19, then took a few years off from winning and came back. And we'll get into the 2020 to 2025 in a second here. But the rule changes and their effects in the span of Marquez's career. Obviously, we were talking about Valentino Rossi earlier, and I think one of the biggest changes that Valentino Rossi dealt with was going from like the 2-stroke bikes to the 4-stroke bikes within the Premier class. One of the things that, Marquez struggled with a little bit was going from the 2-stroke bikes to the 4-stroke bikes as he worked up from, 125 to Moto2 and then obviously into MotoGP. Like for I guess, the rule changes and like what we're looking at here, like what do you think was the most significant challenge for Marc throughout his career as far as like the changing of the rules and the spec tires and all of that as it kind of spanned his career?
Without doubt, the biggest change so far was in 2016, MotoGP swapped from Bridgestone tires to Michelin and went from basically banned the factories from developing their own software for traction control and all this other stuff and had specs, so everybody's got the same electronics. So suddenly the electronics were like way worse than they had been for years. and all the factories, especially the Japanese, because it was Italian software. This is one reason why Ducati sort of suddenly came to the fore in 2016, because the MotoGP spec software was Italian Morelli software, which Ducati had been using for years, whereas the Japanese were like, holy, we have no idea what we're doing. We're in a labyrinth, of algorithms and we have no idea where to go, because we've developed our own Japanese software, which is really, really, really good. And then suddenly we're looking at Italian software. It's like learning a whole new language, And Honda,
I guess for the audience, like from a proprietary standpoint, Honda had software that was specific to their bike. So it knew exactly what its bike would do. It could change it in real time.
Well,
and then all of a sudden...
To be clear, they all did. It wasn't necessarily... Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. It wasn't necessarily that Honda just suddenly had to use the software that Ducati had developed. No. But rather, it was an Italian company that became the spec software, and that's just like much harder for Honda to adapt to, as an example. A Japanese company,
Yamaha, or they each had their own.
Anybody that it was completely different, and B, it was nowhere near as good because it wasn't meant to be good. They were trying to take out some of the, trying to make the bikes more back to the rider rather than the little black box sort of deciding what's going to happen. So that was a huge thing, and Honda and Yamaha were in deep trouble. They had no idea how to work this software. And, the bikes weren't working right. I mean, there was, not like I said, Ducati suddenly came to the fore. And also you went from Bridgestone tyres, which had a super, super, super good front tyre, still the best front tyre. Nobody's ever made a front tyre like the Bridgestone in racing, and not a very good rear tyre. And then we went to Michelin in 2016, which had a really good rear tyre and a pretty rubbish front tyre. So the bikes and the riding styles had to change completely. So the electronics completely changed, and the tires completely changed. And Mark was his thing has always been the way he can charge into corners, because he has this supernatural control of the front tire, do things that other riders can't do, and get past people and make the lap time. Suddenly, that was with the Bridgestone, which was a super good tire. Suddenly he had this not very good front tire, and everybody's like, well, is he still going to be able to do it? Because surely he needs that Bridgestone, that super, super grippy front tire to do what he does. But because he's got that kind of supernatural feel for the front tire, his advantage actually increased. It didn't decrease, because all the other riders were like, whoa, I don't know what to do. It's this front tire is scary, and
I can't trust it.
And Mark just worked out how to use it, which is why he won the title in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and would have won it probably in 2020 if he hadn't crashed up and his own fault and broken his arm. So that should have been a problem for him, but it was the opposite. And again, that's just, all the other riders will say it. They just, I can't do what he does,
So if it's okay, Spurge, I'd like to ask a question about, we talked about rule changes within the confines of Marquez's career. But I'm curious about your take on the rule changes, or the way that the series has developed. In the 50s, in the 1950s, there were, they were single cylinder 500cc air cooled thumpers, with just horribly antiquated, or just whatever. They're just old. They're vintage bikes. It was 1950s. World War II had just happened. These were old bikes. So like the tires were bad. The suspension was bad. Oftentimes the engines were just like far and away better than any other aspect of the machine. And obviously then there was, two strokes came about in MotoGP, and then, tire technology advanced, and then the chassis were famously bad and wonky in the 80s and 90s, I feel like. And then there was a transition from 2-strokes to 500cc 2-strokes to 1000cc 4-strokes in the around year 2000. And I guess, but in part of our lead up discussion, we were talking about this, and I was sort of like, you mentioned the greatest of all time. It's like, it's always a hard thing to quantify because, the different eras and that kind of thing. In my mind, the most recent generational talent that you're looking at, whether you're looking at Marc Márquez, you're looking at Valentino Rossi, you're looking at Mick Doohan, or Wayne Rainey, Freddie Spencer, the most recent one that you are looking at is the one that you think, well, it's never been better than this. And if you sent them back in time, they would just be better than everyone else in that scenario too. And this is a bit of an esoteric question, but I'm curious, do you think that there's anything that a rider like Giacomo Agostini in the 70s or Freddie Spencer in the 80s or something like that would could do better than Marc Márquez, or is he just at this point the pinnacle of motorcycle racing talent and would just be, no matter what era you put him in, he would beat the best rider?
I think if you took all the great riders from their eras, if you had some magical way of just saying, putting them all on the same bikes, Giacomo Agostini, Mick Doohan, Wayne Rainey. I mean, wow, wouldn't that be cool, putting them on the same bikes? And, well, I mean, I think over one race, any of them could win. But I mean, the whole greatest of all time thing is kind of nonsense in a way. But nonetheless, it's impossible not to talk about it because it gives us the chance just to talk about stuff.
To talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of, my podium of greatest of all time, my own personal podium is Rossi, Marquez, and Kenny Roberts. Those are my three guys. I'm not sort of saying who would be top. Certainly that's how I started this book, probably thinking Rossi was the greatest. And I would have like four main metrics of a professional motorcycle racer. The first one is obviously riding talent, right? The second is intellect. The third is bravery. And the fourth is determination. Those are the things you need all four of those in huge amounts to make it properly, as a multiple world champion. And I think riding talent, without a doubt, Marquez is the best of all time, I would say. Because, okay, so the front tires we have now, he can do what he does with the front tire, and other guys can do it occasionally. But back in the day, King Kenny and Freddie and Doohan, they couldn't do that as much with the front tire. So I think that's an amazing talent, So I would say he's probably the best on talent. Intellect, like I said earlier, him and Rossi to me have been the smartest guys. I mean, King Kenny and Rainey, I would say, also are up there on that kind of, that kind of how sparky their intellect is. Bravery, without a doubt, Marc Márquez. No one's braver than him. He's happy to go out and crash his brains out and just carry on like nothing's happened. And determination, no one has gone as many years as he has from losing the championship to coming back to winning it again. Nobody has gone 13 years between his first world championship and his latest. No one's done that before. No, never. So from a determination way, zero doubt on bravery, determination, and intellect. Talent, I think talent, a lot of riders have talent. It's how you use it, and,
right.
and the length of time that you're able to deploy it as well.
Yes.
So I would argue in my own personal that he is the greatest of all time, with Rossi and Kenny just after him. But that's just my personal,
Sure.
Everybody's got their, it's a personal thing. I'm not saying that he is. I just, in my own personal, mind, that's what I think.
I think it's fair. Well, you're the expert as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know about that.
I have my own reasons for other, you could argue it all day long, which, like I said, it's really fun to speculate about. That's why it's so fun to talk about.
Do you want to do a counterpoint, Zach?
No, let's move on.
So just kind of a parallel question off of that. You talked in the book, but we also talked about it a little bit earlier was, the moves that Dorna made to level the playing field, right? Now all of a sudden, all these bikes are pretty even, and so the side effect of that is that racing, could be argued that has become more dangerous despite airbags and traction control and all this stuff, because now the bikes are all at that same level where it's not about, one rider being a lap ahead of everybody or a half a lap ahead of everybody.
Exactly.
The racing has all gotten a lot closer and a lot tighter. And I think that's made it more exciting perhaps for a spectator, it could be argued that has made racing, more dangerous. And that's really, for the large part of Marc's career, the era that he raced in.
Yeah, I completely agree. The racetracks are incredibly safe now. The motorbikes are incredibly safe. They don't break all the time and throw the riders off. The riding gear is incredibly good now. Way, 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 way better than it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. So all those, the primary safety and the secondary safety are better. But because all the bikes are the same, you get big packs of riders riding around together. And most of the bad injuries and deaths we've had in the last 10 years, 15 years, have generally been a rider falling off and then being hit by a guy who's only a few meters, they're doing 100 miles an hour and he's a few yards behind him. He can't, he's committed to his line, they're all on the limit and he can't avoid the guy in front and he hits him and badly hurts him or kills him. And that is so real worry, a real worry. There are some races where you're just going, oh my God, and we had a couple of times last year when a guy went down and was, the guy behind him missed him by 2-3 feet, So that is a consideration, and that adds a kind of complication to the racing, from a strategy point of view, and that's something else that Marc is just amazing about, how he strategizes the race, where he's going to push, when he's going to, ease off and let the tires cool down a bit and then push again, and try to stay out of trouble, basically. That's another reason why you need to qualify on the front row now. You don't want to be going into the first corner with all the bikes together, separated by inches and feet in 10th place, because it gets ugly back there. They're all riding into each other, and somebody crashes and you can get taken out before you've done 300 yards. You've been, so it's really important to qualify at the front, get into that first corner and get out of it without anybody riding into you. So all these things are kind of considerations that a racer has to make,
I think it's another thing that should be brought up in this context, unfortunately, is that we've seen this, I think, a lot in Moto3, which is the 250cc four-stroke singles. This is the sort of like feeder class that travels with the MotoGP World Championship, is the Moto3 World Championship, which is largely, let's call it what it is, children, or young men and women, usually boys who are battling tooth and nail to be the next best thing. And the bikes are so close together and the talent is so close. And you get these races where it's like 15 bikes covered by 1.2 seconds for 20 laps. It's just berserk. And it's awesome, but there have been a lot of injuries and unfortunately deaths. And maybe, I'm not sure if you know the stats off the top of your head, Matt, but I feel like there have been more bad injuries and fatalities in the lower classes, especially Moto3 and that level of bike.
If we go back 15 years, we lost Shoya Tomizawa, sorry, who was, and then we lost Marco Simoncelli, and we lost Jason Dupasquier, and they were all like guys who crashed and then were hit by guys behind them. So those 3 deaths in 15 years was more deaths than in the previous 15 years, let's say. So there is a kind of an increase, but I mean, I think we've been very lucky, the last few years. And the amazing thing when you watch MotoGP or Moto3 or you get these guys going around in massive packs, and you're like watching through your fingers, because it's like there's no way they can all get around that corner, but they do, and they're all like separated literally by half an inch, some of them, and it's like, wow. And you just have to kind of respect and props to the riders for being able to do all that, and just through their genius skill to be able to ride within half an inch of each other at like 100 miles an hour and make it work, wow.
It's one of my favorite things about motorcycle racing is this combination. We've talked about it, this combination of huge egos and like wanting to do anything to win, but massive mutual respect between, because that's what you have to have, right? Yeah. And this is the case even at like low level racing that I've done, or slightly higher level racing that you've done, Matt. Is like, it's cool that you can go into a corner like that and be like, oh, that's Rob. I trust Rob. Rob knows that Rob's in the same situation I'm in. He's got to go to work on Monday or whatever. And these guys are kind of doing the same thing. They're bailing into those corners, and there is a lot of mutual respect, even though they're just like, I'll do pretty much anything to beat that guy, but I won't bash into him because I trust that he won't bash into me, and we have an agreement here.
like I said earlier, that's that whole thing of intimidation and getting a reputation for being a bit scary. You're going into the corner and one guy comes up the inside, you think, well, I know him. If I lean on him, he's going to get out of the way. But if Márquez comes up the inside, you're just like, there's no point to me.
Exactly. I'm not going to lean on him because
I'm just going to get out of the way, because I know who's prepared to die more than I am.
Exactly.
I know he is.
Yeah. So, Spurg,
speaking of being prepared to die, I mean,
I wanted to transition into your final point here.
So I think we're at a point now where we mentioned this earlier, but Marc had, kind of a rough 2020 to 2024. You mentioned earlier, Zack gave the anecdote and you kind of like clarified that it was, he's raised up his arm to Honda and he said, look at, what I've done for you. And he eventually transitions over to Ducati. Famously at this point, comes back last year and wins.
Spoiler alert. If you haven't watched the end of the 2025 MotoGP season at this point, he did win the world championship. Just so
Mark,
in case you were just holding, you were going to binge on all the races in February or whatever.
Matt gives it away in the book. If you get to the end of the book, you learn.
You've shown the title at this point, yeah.
But it's something where I think the question is now like, what happens for 2026? And as we were coming in to record this, and I'm not sure if you saw the news breaking, Matt, but apparently Mark had actually for I believe it was La Sexta had given a quote. There was a pull quote that came out that said, I already know I'm going to retire sooner because my body will push me harder than my mind. So like, it seems like there's some news breaking about, potential, retirement speculations and this and that, in your point or in your position, like, what do you see the future holding for Mark in 2026 and beyond?
The last time I interviewed him for the book was in August last year. So he was already, pretty much on his way to the world title. And he said 3, 4, 5 years. That's what he said. And the time I interviewed him before that, he said he definitely wants to do the 850s, the new rules that start in 2027. So, minds change. I mean, so he got hurt at the end of the 2025 season. It didn't seem to be that bad an injury, but it was another shoulder injury. And so he hasn't ridden a race bike since October. And the first time he will race at the start of the season, I think it's literally, is it March the 1st? I don't know.
I love that you're looking at an actual calendar.
You have a calendar. You have the calendar of the year.
I have a literal calendar on my wall. So it's March the first race of this year, and so he won't have raced. I mean, he'll obviously, he's tested. He will have tested and stuff, but he won't have raced. So, and he's obviously very much in love with his girlfriend, and I think they're kind of getting towards that stage where they're probably going to get married, and they're probably thinking about kids. So, these guys are sportsmen and racers, but they're also human beings. They fall in love and they think, oh yeah, let's start a family and stuff. I mean, that doesn't mean he's going to stop racing. But so he said 3, 4, 5 years. I would say 26, 27, 28, maybe, but he, you don't need to. I think his next contract's going to be a 1-year contract. Yeah. So when his current Ducati contract is up at the end of the 2026, and he said he wants a 1-year contract for 27, and that's could be for various reasons. One, because we got these completely new bikes coming in 2027, and you don't want to nail yourself down to long term. If suddenly maybe the Ducati will be the worst bike on the grid in 2027. It's currently the best bike on the grid. Maybe it'll be the worst bike in the grid, and he will then think, oh well, I've only got a 1 year, and I can then go and sign with Honda or Kawasaki or whoever. You know what I mean?
Well, you made
or
the
maybe
point.
It's just because he wants to be sort of free to say, actually, you know what? I've had enough.
Yeah. Right. Well,
it's impossible for us to know.
You made the point in the book, you mentioned Ducati being the best bike on the grid, but, it sounds like through some of the changes from the 24 to the 25 season, I believe you put it as, was it 23.9 or 24.9? Like you made the joke about how it wasn't quite as good as the bike that was, out the season before.
Yeah. Ducati made a mistake with their 2025 bike, and it wasn't as good as their 2024 bike. Marc was riding a 25 bike. His factory Ducati teammate Pecco Bagnaia was riding a 25 bike, and Fabio Di Giannantonio was riding a 2025 bike. Marc won the championship. Bagnaia finished 5th. He'd finished 1st or 2nd in the previous 4 years, and Di Giannantonio finished 6th, 7th, 8th, something like that. So once again, this was Marc, and Pecco Bagnaia said it. He was world champion in 22, 23. He said it after 2-3 races. He said, I can't do what Marc does with this bike. I need front end feel. I can't feel the front. I'm going to a corner thinking, okay, here we go. And then whoosh, down he goes. Yeah. And Marc can go into a corner and feel the front going and save it, either on his elbow or whatever. I mean, I think his brother Alex, who finished 2nd in the championship last year, riding a 2024 bike, said the difference between us and Marc is that all of us will go into a corner and have one slide and crash. He'll go into the corner have 2 slides and save both of them and carry on. You know what I mean? So that's a huge weapon that you can have on, right. In your advantage. So, that was just, again, his insane talent coming through, But how long will he carry on? So I would say it's impossible to say, but he said to me 3, 4, 5 years. I would probably put it more like 3, maybe 4.
And you're hinting at, I mean, I know we, during the break, we talked about, it sounds like there are some changes coming to MotoGP for across the board. So is there a tire shift potentially coming? And it sounds like they're going to reduce sizes for engines.
2026 is the last year of the current rules with 1,000cc bikes with a lot of downforce aerodynamics, which came from Ducati, from Formula One know-how, Formula One car know-how, and also ride height devices that reduce wheelies and stuff, which also came from Formula One. They're reducing aero. They're banning ride height devices. They're reducing the engines from 1,000cc to 850 because they're already pretty much doing 230 miles an hour, at some tracks, which is not a lot of speed to be doing on a motorbike when you're riding 2 feet from one guy on your left and a foot on your guy on the right. So they're making them slightly slower. And I don't actually think it'll make much difference to the top speed, but they're making them slightly slower in a straight line, reducing downforce aero and doing other side, and also changing from Michelin to Pirelli tires. So this is going to be the biggest regulation change probably ever in 78 years of MotoGP. So, and that will be another amazing moment. Will Marc still be able to adapt himself to the different bikes and especially to the different tires and still be better than everyone else? Or maybe another guy will come along and that's why we're here, to see what happens, Right. So that will be another fascinating. I mean, I hate making predictions, but he basically walked last season. He just destroyed everyone. I mean, he won 11 Grand Prix out of. I mean, he missed the last 4 because he got taken out. So he ran 11 of like 17 or 18 Grand Prix. He just basically destroyed everyone. And the bikes and the tires are basically the same this year, but he will have a better bike this year because I think Ducati will go back to their 2024 setup. So I think he will win this year's championship. So then the big question is going into 2027 with these completely new rules, completely new tires, whether he can keep doing it. And that will be fascinating. I'm really, this year's a bit weird actually, 2026, because we're all kind of already looking forward and excited about 2027. And this is we've almost forgotten about 2026 before it started. So it's a bit weird, really.
Well, can we book you for Highside, Lowside, talking about 2027 MotoGP when the time comes back? Because I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. I think that would be fun. And I appreciate, as always, your predictions when they come around and your insights and the book. I guess I don't know if we're quite ready to transition out here, Spurge. I think we might be. Can you tell us, tell the ladies and gentlemen listening where they can find your Marc Márquez book and purchase it?
Right. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm very much an independent one-man band. I like kind of being a bit punk and a bit indie, being in charge of my own destiny. I don't like being told what to do. So basically, I published the book myself. And it's only available from my site, which is www.matoxley.bigcartel.com. Just go on there, and we send to the United States. We send books everywhere from where I live in London. So we've already sold out of the first edition.
You should have told me that before I wrote in mine. I was making notes in my book. And the
second edition, when I brought it, the second edition is going to be, it's going to be pretty much on sale now. I think it is on sale now. And it's only got a few hundred extra words. The first edition ended when he won the championship in Motegi, but literally I was finish the book and get it printed. And so the second one literally has another 400 words in it, taking it through to the injury and up to the end of the season at Valencia where he got the trophy and blah, 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 and a couple of new photos. So they're both basically the same. basically the same.
But, you know,
but yeah.
I've
I assume
seen
this will be
the
worth a
way
lot of
your
money, though,
books
our
have
first editions.
skyrocketed in value. I know Stealing Speed, when it was out of print for a while, was selling for quite a few $100s on.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So now I wish I would have, my first edition. I didn't realize there was a second edition coming out so quickly.
Right on. Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for your time, Matt. And
I've enjoyed it.
as you know,
You're not off the hook just yet.
exactly, the penance that you pay, aside from having to talk to Spurge and I, is to listen to an engine sound and try to guess it.
Yeah.
Everyone's least favorite part of being a guest on the Highside Lowside podcast, but we love watching people squirm. And as the viewers and listeners will know, we struggle just like everyone else does.
But while it's a struggle for us, it is the most enjoyable part of the podcast for people listening, because they get to watch us kind of rack our own brains to figure out what this is.
That's right.
I do want to give a shout out to our friends at Akrapovic. Akrapovic Exhaust is kind enough to sponsor the Highside Lowside engine sound guessing game. If you're not familiar with Akrapovic, they make premium exhaust for premium motorcycles. So if you're looking for
Sorry,
make it natural.
I'm
No, do it in. Jump it in. No.
On yours.
Yeah.
5 different factories in MotoGP: Aprilia, Ducati, Honda, KTM, and Yamaha, and 4 of them use Akrapovic.
See, this is
Yeah.
the kind. We
So,
should have just
you know.
had you given the
Yeah.
call.
Your
out.
knowledge knows no bounds.
Yeah.
Matt Oxley. I love it.
So thank you to Akrapovic for sponsoring not only the Highside Lowside engine sound guessing game, but also for all of their work they do in MotoGP.
Making
All right.
MotoGP bikes go vroom vroom. That's what we love so much.
Exactly.
Without any further ado, gentlemen, are you ready to start your engines?
Yes.
Yep.
Let's
All
listen.
right.
And as usual, everybody, shout it out if you know it. All righty.
Guest honors, Matt. How
Okay.
many cylinders do you
Yeah.
hear?
What do you got, Matt?
2.
Okay,
Pretty sure
I like
about
it. Spurge.
Pretty sure about that.
Agree? Disagree?
I've learned early in my career that you don't disagree with Mat Oxley. So
Well, I'm not just.
Do you think it's a MotoGP bike?
Everyone's saying how much I know. Don't be too sure about that.
doesn't sound like a MotoGP bike.
It is not.
Yeah.
Not only is it not a MotoGP bike, I think I know the brand, and I'll give you guys a hint, and I'll say it is not a MotoGP bike that we just heard. Obviously, it is also not made by a manufacturer that is in MotoGP. I believe.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking BMW twin, flat twin.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of noise when it kind of stopped, which is, I think, I'm not an engineer. That kind of rings a bell. I had a BMW twin until recently, so I'm probably going to go BMW twin. I was thinking maybe a little V twin of some sort. I'm going to go BMW.
All right. So for the
RS,
audience,
something rather.
for the audience listening, Matt is referring to an opposed twin. So this is the Boxer engine, the classic Boxer twin from BMW. Zach, is that where your mind was going?
That's where my mind's going. I did screw this up before. I think there was a BMW. There was a BMW Boxer twin, and I thought it was the 360 crank parallel twin from the F800s from years ago, and it turned out to be a horizontal, the flat twin, the Boxer twin, and I was very embarrassed. I feel like, let's listen to it one more time. But before, I'm going to put one stake in the ground. I feel like this might be. Gosh, I'm not sure. It might be a pre-2013 Boxer.
Do you want to hint before
the
we
oil
listen
head.
to it one more time?
Yes. Yeah. Let's get a hint and listen to it one more time.
All right. So before we listen to it one more time, for the audience's sake, not for our sake, of course, but for the audience's sake, the first hint today, let's see, from producer Chase, it is a flat twin Boxer engine. So we're on the right track.
So unless it's a 1920 Douglas or whatever.
Very good. Very good. Which was what the BMW was based on, by the way. Yeah, there you
go. Which I don't think it is. It's probably a BMW. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I want to listen to it one more time because I think it might be an oilhead, a pre-2013 BMW, but I'm not 100% sure. Can we listen to it one more time, Spurjo?
Let's play it one more time for ourselves and for the audience.
Here we go.
Yeah, I think it's not a huge, it's not a 1250 or a 1300 because they're a bit more lumpy, aren't they? And that sounds very sweet. So I'm thinking, obviously I'm probably going to be wrong, but that sounds really sweet, sweeter than the 1250 I had recently.
Okay. So, well, yeah, and I should clarify too. There's
probably a bunch of audience members right now being like, what the hell does a sweet engine sound like? I love that we're using like adjectives and it's probably frustrating certain people right now.
Well, so I'd like to clarify something, which is that I say pre-2013, that would be pre-2013 in a BMW GS or RT or RS, or those bikes. But the R9T and the R9T and its spawn, use that same oilhead engine up to this current day. So it could be later than that date if it was a 9T model or a related 9T model. I'm not as sure anymore about that, but I guess I'm gonna go R9T spawn.
And I think
that's my guess. I don't know.
Matt, to your point, I think it was 2018 with the 1250 that they changed the cams, wasn't it? Like it got like the variable valve timing or something.
I'm not as hooked into kind of latest road bike specs as I used to be. So when you start talking about these little changes, I'm like,
that was when they did 1250 was into the shift cam
technology,
the variable valves, I think, and blah blah blah. But yeah, it sounds like the older engine to me.
That's what I'm saying.
But I've been quite wrong.
That was the sweet to Matt's point. I think the sound
that was when they lost their sweetness.
And 1300s might have lost a little bit of that sweetness.
Yeah, they go a bit lumpy, a little bit lumpy.
Right. Okay, well, Spurge, let's get.
We have
is there another hint?
One more hint. Okay. There's one more hint. Not because Matt or Zach needs it, but because I do. The final hint is this engine is mostly the same as the engine in its adventure touring sibling, but it has been retuned for touring.
Okay, so it's an RT, I guess.
Yeah, or an RS.
Well, I guess, or an RS, yeah.
But I mean, to me, I guess those engines are so much like I wouldn't think that they sound different.
Yeah,
I don't know if they are different. Are they? But I mean, producer Chase does his research. Was there a bike that didn't have shift cam? I don't know. Whatever. I think we might be getting in the weeds too much here. I think I'm as close to being right as I'm going to be. I don't know about you guys. I don't really have any more.
Oh, all right. So this is delightful because producer Chase didn't give us any warnings. Sometimes producer Chase will give us a warning and he's just like, hey guys, I promise this has nothing to do with the person that's on the podcast. But today,
it does have something to do with the podcast guest.
It does. So this is a 2015 BMW R1200 RT sent in from Nicholas, and Chase went back and found a photo from Mat Oxley's Instagram post of September 2024, where Matt, it seems like you were talking about how much you enjoyed owning a 1200 RT. Does that sound about
1250,
right?
1250, a little bit later. Yeah. 2020. And I love a boxer twin. I love those BMWs. I really do. Really do.
Okay.
So this is a shout out to Nicholas. Nicholas, thank you so much for writing in. Producer Chase, I'm not sure where these quotes are from, but there was a quote here that said, you wouldn't know you're riding a tour except for you're so comfy, screen up, elbows out. And I'm assuming that's, I don't know if is that a Matt quote? Was that your quote, Matt?
Yeah, it was. Screen up, elbows out, I think. Yeah.
Screen up, elbows out. Oh, that's got retired racer written all over it. Yeah, I'm on a comfy bike now, but I still got the edge. Don't mess with me. Well, yeah, I like that. I mean, I will say that's first of all, props to producer Chase, who had us on the ropes yet again, as he always does. But I would like to say that I'm gonna give us a little round of applause. I think the three of us did pretty well. You especially, Matt. You called out BMW right off the bat, and I think I think all things considered, while I was completely wrong about my year guess, we did have a beat on what the bike was, and I'm proud of us for that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
I just followed the two of you, so I'll give you guys all the credit. I was just like nodding along as we went through that. So.
All right.
Well, we've come to another end.
Cool.
Well, for the audience's sake, Zach and I are going to continue to give you some commentary as we round out the episode. But Matt, I want to take a second and say, thank you for writing the book. For those of you that are looking for, something to read, ramping up for the 2026 MotoGP season, for someone like myself, I found it to be incredibly interesting. You have a way of writing that, you don't have to be a MotoGP aficionado to enjoy reading the book. And I learned a lot of stuff. And it was a truly enjoyable read. So thank you for writing the book, and thank you for joining us today to talk about it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Been really great. Always fun to talk to you guys.
Right on. Cheers, Matt. Thanks for hanging out. Talk soon.
All
I
right.
hope.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, as always, it is incredibly enjoyable to have one Mat Oxley on the podcast.
It's so good.
I find this to be an enjoyable conversation, even for someone like myself. Like I follow MotoGP much more on the fringes than yourself, and obviously Matt. I found the book to be an awesome read, and I enjoyed the conversation with the two of you. I thought it was a lot of fun.
You know me, I could talk about MotoGP all day long. I just get such a kick out of talking to Matt because he's not I know people that are super into MotoGP that are just into MotoGP, and like they know exactly who finished first, second, and third at the Italian Grand Prix in 2013. You can they're encyclopedic in their knowledge, but he has this like really holistic view, and he's such a historian. He's so interested in what's happened in the past and how it affects what we do now. And he has like just this vast knowledge. I just find it so, the little tidbit I threw in the Engine Town guessing game where I mentioned that like bike from World War I or whatever that I happened to know about. And he was sort of like, that's actually the bike that BMW is based on. Like you can barely push anything by him. He just knows so much about so much in motorcycling.
It's the, my personal history background is probably why I like his writing so much, but also how I like talking to him, because he has a way of incorporating historical facts where it makes the story more well-rounded, both in his conversation style as well as his writing style. He's the kind of guy you would want to just sit and have a beer with and talk about motorcycling. And,
and that's what Marc Márquez got to do. Lucky chap.
Yeah. You could learn a little bit about MotoGP, but it wouldn't just be about who came in first, second, and third, True enough. All right. Well, we'll move the podcast along. We should, this is actually a good segue because we're going to move on to the comment, and you win a t-shirt if you have this comment, but also Nicholas, who sent us in the audio clip of their 2015 BMW R1200 RT. Make sure you shoot us an email at the Highside Lowside at RevZilla.com. Get us your address as well as your preferred t-shirt style and size, and we will get you a Highside Lowside t-shirt. There are a few different Highside Lowside t-shirts out there in the wild now, so you get to pick the style that you want as well as your size, the future winner.
We got to get Mat Oxley a Highside Lowside t-shirt. Does he have one? We
should send him like one of every Highside Lowside. We should blow up his mailbox the way he blew up our mailboxes with Mark the Magnificent books.
Indeed. Okie doke. The Highside Lowside comment/review came in this time via email, I think, from George. But this is a friendly reminder that you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube, whatever you like. And we will take them all into account as best we can. And if we pick your comment, question, or hateful diatribe, then you win a t-shirt. And this one, like I said, comes in from George. What did George have to say here, Spurjo?
If this is stupid, please forgive me. I know I've emailed y'all a lot. I enjoyed the episodes on the history and the lore of the Goldwing and the SV650. So why not do a dinosaur dual sport episode featuring the KLR 650, DR 650, XR 650L, and perhaps even the DRZ 400 and T-Dubs 200? The history of dual sports is very, very interesting, and the current divergence in the market between 80s and 90s tech in the DR, XR, and TW contrasted with the traction control modes of the 690 and the ride modes, the new DRZ, the new offerings in the 390 models, etc., is all an interesting rift in the market. That's what George has to say. Zach, what is your gut reaction about the Dinosaur Dual Sport episode that he threw forth and pontificated on?
Well, I think it's a fun idea. I don't know exactly what it looks like. We haven't really done a full brainstorm on this, George. I apologize. But I do think it's a fun idea because it's an interesting genre of motorcycles. I think because progress is the thing that most people end up talking about. And it's the thing that companies like to talk about most in the, like new hot metal, right? We talk about new hot metal a lot.
Right.
Our last episode was about best of 2026, like coming bikes, like what's exciting, what's new, the Kawasaki new the brand new BMW that. And we like talking about that stuff.
Yeah.
But this genre of motorcycles is sort of like evergreen in its interest because these bikes don't change. And it's fascinating. It really is interesting.
I think that's been some of what we've had fun with. Even like he mentions the SV650 episode or the Goldwing episode. Like for me, getting into some of that research and looking into it, thinking about like when we've done the used bike episodes, like it's fun to go back and look and like, oh, this is a cool bike to buy. It's almost similar to that in the fact that like, the technology really hasn't drastically changed for a lot of these miles. Like if you bought a KLR 650 from 20 years ago and you compared it to a KLR 650 today, there'd be some differences, but like it's largely going to be the same bike.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting. George brought up the Goldwing and the SV650, and those bikes in my mind are maybe arguably similarly iconic, but really different in one key way, which is that a Goldwing started off as a certain thing and has steadily progressed into it. The evolution has been really transformational. Whereas the SV650 was introduced and then evolved, but then it over-evolved to the point where people were like, I don't like this anymore. Just give me the thing that you made in 1999 again, please, with fuel injection and a round headlight. That's what I want. I want the thing that you made before. And so Suzuki made it again, and it's a terrific bike, just like it was in 1999. And I think that's really interesting that those two bikes have had really different trajectories, but are similarly iconic in our minds.
I want to go back. So while I'm looking for it, Zach, I do believe that you wrote an article that would be a relevant call out here. I
do want to call that out. Is now the time for my shameless plug?
I think it should be.
Let me take you back, viewers, to 2018, when I and my lovely colleagues, Ari Henning and Spencer Robert, worked for Motorcyclist magazine. And we made a little YouTube series called On Two Wheels, which sort of grew eventually into our RevZilla series CTXP. Anyway, I digress. I wrote an article for Motorcyclist magazine in 2018, and the title was Riding Dinosaurs. It was a three-way comparative test between the 2018 Honda XR650L, Kawasaki KLR 650, and Suzuki DR 650S, three of the machines that George brought up first. And I call this out in such specificity because I'm kind of proud of that article that I wrote. And Spencer Robert took some awesome photos of us riding and of the bikes themselves. And there's I think like I said, I don't want to toot my horn too much, but I think a decent write-up of the bikes, what they mean, why they're still important, and why they could always be important, even if you don't, even if they never progressed at all. They're still valid, both for context in the world of motorcycling today, and also just for pure enjoyment.
So I would say you should read Zach's article. We'll try and find a link and
go to my previous employer's website. Yeah, I think if you search for my name and then the brand, and then the what am I trying to say?
Dinosaurs.
My name, no, not the title, but like the model of bikes. Like if you search for KLR 650, XR 650, Zach Quartz, you might find it. Anyway,
we'll see if we
like I
can
said, I'm proud of
dig it up for you and throw it out there. The other thing, George, is a few seasons ago we did do an episode entitled "What Makes a Dual Sport and Why It Matters." So if you're just looking for some interesting dual sport content, Spencer Robert co-hosted that one with me, and we had Patrick Garvin on, and we dove a little bit into what makes a dual sport and why it matters. But outside of that, George, we will take your suggestion into account, and maybe in a future season we'll dive into a dinosaur dual sport episode or something like that. So thank you, George, for writing in. Don't forget to shoot us an email to highside@RevZilla.com. For those of you out there, you can be like George and throw in a question, comment, or review to Apple, Spotify, or our email address. George, we need your address, your preferred t-shirt size, and your Highside, Lowside preferred t-shirt style, and we will get you a shirt mailed out.
Spurjo, this has been fun. What's your big old, sorry, let me back up a little bit. I'm still shaking the rust off here. Quick reminder to send us an email at highside@RevZilla.com with your comment, question, or complaint. And you could leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching there, or on Spotify if you're listening or watching there, or on Apple Podcasts if that's where you listen. We love hearing from you in almost any way, shape, or form. So please do remember to hit us up if you have thoughts, comments, concerns.
Zachary, I'm left with this. So we just talked about an episode from season 6, episode 5, what makes a dual sport and why it matters.
Yes.
You were not co-hosting on that episode.
I was not.
And why was that?
I actually don't remember. When was it? Who hosted? Did you do that one with
Spencer? Hosted that one with me.
Right.
I'll fill in the blanks here. You're welcoming your first child into the world, and
it was paternity leave. That was why I missed it.
Leave, yes.
Oh, right. Okay. So it would have been about 3 years ago now then.
And I just want to say, I know that you have you and your family have just welcomed in your second child to the world, and you are joining us right before you are heading out on maternity leave. We alluded at the beginning of the episode that you have a lot going on right now. You're recovering still from a motorcycle crash. You have a new child. And I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of our audience for making the time today to sit down and talk about MotoGP. I know that you have a lot going on in your personal life, and it just means a lot that you were able to work this in. It's by far, I'm sure, not the most important thing on your docket today, but it does mean a lot that you took the time. And I just want to say congratulations to you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I do sometimes question why, when I have such a lovely wife and partner and such a rad little boy and a lovely new baby girl in the house, all of whom I am just obsessed with, why I made the time to record a motorcycle podcast. But the truth is, I do love doing this too. And I like talking about bikes, and I love any opportunity to talk to Mr. Mat Oxley, as you know, and have a lot of respect for you and Mr. Chase as well. And I'm lucky to have the support of my family to do this, even in a time when our household is upside
busy.
Down and backwards a little bit. Yeah, a little bit busy. And so with that, I do need to go get in a lift here and go to a follow-up doctor's appointment with my spine surgeon to see if my broken neck is healing as scheduled. And I will be crutching myself with my broken ankle to that car because I can't drive there myself. Yet again, don't know why she puts up with me.
Well, if you're new to the Highside Lowside podcast, that might sound a lot heavier out of the context of what's going on in Zach's life. So just go back about 2 episodes and you can get a complete deep dive as to Zach's recovery from a motorcycle accident that happened later at the tail end of 2025.
Right.
There's so much great content here on Highside Lowside. We get a little personal as you can.
You'll laugh, you'll cry here. Yeah. We touch on lots of stuff. It's Marc Márquez, it's Zach's new baby, and everything in between. I appreciate you calling that out, Spurge, and giving me a little tip of the cap there. That means a lot. But I do appreciate you and Mr. Chase for accommodating my schedule, and all of you listening and watching, for being a part of another discussion with us here. I had fun, and I think I speak for Spurge when I say we hope that we see you next time.
Yeah, get out of here. Go to your doctor's appointment. Bye-bye. See you, everybody.
Hey, everybody.